okay, gastrointestinal pathophysiology. And I've put a fair amount of review for the anatomy and physiology because as we work our way through, it really does link in, okay? So what I did was I took that GI lecture that you already had, your anatomy and physiology one, which I left in there for you, and I put it on steroids, basically. You know, I kind of pulled stuff out that I think is more basic for you guys that you should already know, and I put in stuff and I tried to sort of tie it in together. So let's go through that basic structure. Here we go, okay? So, you know, we've got the oral cavity, we've got those salivary glands, which are... Oh gosh, I think I did. Let me double check that I started the tape. Okay, so here's that basic structure. You know, the thing about the GI tract, guys, is it's just a big long tube. And the other good reminder is to think of it as the external environment, right? Because if you think about it, when you stick your finger into your mouth, you could trace it right down that whole GI tube and right back out to the external environment through the anus. So it is open to the external environment. And one of the things that we will talk about that is very applicable is, I'm out of breath now, is that because it's open to the external environment, there are several pathogens that we need to fight off through this GI tract that we ingest daily. Remember your micro? Okay. And all those little microorganisms that can get in. So the important thing about the GI tract is that we need to have a strong immune system surrounding it to fight off those invaders, okay? So we've got those salivary glands around the mouth. Okay, I'm not going to get into those. I think you probably should remember those from A&P. Esophagus, obviously, coming down. It's going to be posterior to the trachea, down to the stomach. What muscular structure does the esophagus pass through to get to the stomach? This is going to apply later when we talk about the path. What does the esophagus pass through from the thorax to the abdomen? Well, you're on the right track, by the lungs through the diaphragm, okay? And that's going to be an important thing to know in a little bit. We have those four parts of the stomach. You know, I'm not going to ask you those four parts, but if you could remember, you should probably remember them anyway. You know, how it's kind of rounded up to the top and then it comes down and it meets what part of the small intestines? What's the first part between the pylorus of the stomach and the... What's the first part of the small intestine? Very good, duodenum. Okay, duodenum is about 8 inches long. It's a C-shaped structure. In what organ does the duodenum go around? An endocrine exocrine organ. The head of the pancreas sits in the lap of the duodenum. If you take a look at that, you can just see a little bit of the pancreas sticking out there, okay? The duodenum makes this C-shaped curve and the pancreas sits right into it. That's going to be important because the pancreas is going to help us with our digestion. I'll show you why in a little bit. Okay, so the head of the pancreas sits in the lap of the duodenum. The duodenum makes a nice C-shaped curve, and then it turns into what part of the small intestines? Majority of the intestines are going to be the jejunum, right? Then it turns into the ileum. And the reason, guys, that there's different parts, let me tell you the reason. Basically is because of the different types of glands that are on the surface, okay? Where it's located, the duodenum is actually retroperitoneal. The rest of the small intestines is peritoneal. It's in those serous membranes, okay? And there's a little bit of a change with the function. The jejunum is going to have the majority of absorption of nutrients, which is a real important thing, right? Because when we get into gluten sensitivities, those people get a wearing down of the villi and the microvilli. I'm going to explain all this. I'm kind of just giving you a once over, okay? Absorption. Ileum is going to deal with absorption as well. Ileum is going to deal with the enterohepatic circulation, which is going to reabsorb our bile salts. So that's why it has different names. Location and functions. So even though it's one long tube, there's different areas that are going to perform different functions, okay? So then the ileum is going to come down and it's going to join into the large intestines of the cecum, right? Ileocecal valve, ring a bell. That cecum is going to be that little outpacketing, and somewhere just around there is going to be the little finger-like, worm-like, vermiform appendix. Okay. Then we have ascending colon, hepatic flexure, I almost said splenic, hepatic flexure, transverse colon, splenic flexure. Descending colon is going to turn into that S-shaped sigmoid. Sigmoid then leads to the rectum. The rectum then is ended by the anus. I was trying to think of a nice way to put that. Okay, so GI tract, mouth to anus, and that's how it goes. I love it. You guys don't laugh when I say anus. When I say anus and A&P, everybody's like... Anyway, okay, so all those different parts. Just a once over. Good little review. Oh, I did a closer little picture of the colon, and let me tell you why. So we talked about the general anatomical structures, the flexures, ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid, rectum. What I want to point out is when we get into the GI tract, there's different directions and groupings of muscles. There's two layers. I'm going to show you a picture in just a minute. The outer layer of the colon, though, I want to point out, is not a solid layer of muscle. Can you see those strips? Okay, those strips, there's 3 of them, are the grouping of muscle that go through the large intestine. Okay, and that's an important structure that'll tie in a little bit. There's also fat that sort of pokes off the large intestine. Those are not diverticula. Those fat flaps per se are called epiploic appendages. Okay, so they're not diverticula. Can you see those? They're yellow on this picture. Okay, they're not diverticular. They're the epiploic appendages. They're the normal anatomy in the colon. Okay. This is also a great picture to show those serous membranes and how those serous membranes envelop and hold the intestines. When I have my A&P students dissect cats, I have them actually take the cat once they open up the abdominal cavity and flip it upside down. And they can see how those serous membranes hold the intestines in place, but they allow motility. If you remember back to dissecting the cat, when you opened up the abdominal cavity, or if you're in surgery now, you may see it, open up the abdominal cavity, the intestines can move. Well, that's important, okay? But they can't move too much, right? Because they get out of alignment and they can get twisted. And that would be a bad thing. So those serous membranes provide enough stability so they can't get out of place, but they also allow the intestines to move. As opposed to the kidneys. The kidneys are actually pushed back by the serous membranes, which is super important, right? Because if they toast, you're going to kink the ureter, and that's obviously a bad thing. Okay? So I think that's a good picture because you could see how it kind of comes down and it envelops the colon and helps to hold it in place. Some basic functions. Okay, so skeletal muscle. I think this is all pretty straightforward, but let me just buzz through it and make sure they cover everything. So how things get broken down and how they get absorbed. So obviously, mastication is going to be the actual process of chewing in the mouth. You're going to have enzymes that will start to break substances down as well. The esophagus, we start with skeletal muscle. This is something that may be a good review. We start with skeletal muscle in the mouth. Halfway down the esophagus, it starts to turn into smooth. The rest of the GI tract is smooth until we get to the anus. At the anus, we have smooth, but we also have skeletal, thank God, because that allows us to decide when we're going to defecate as long as our nervous system is intact, okay? So basically, mouth and anus are going to have skeletal muscle. Okay, mouth halfway down the esophagus, the rest is smooth muscle. And that smooth muscle, don't forget, is going to be under control of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, that'll help to facilitate the peristalsis, that wave-like movement which will push foodstuffs forward. So stomach acids are going to help to break down substances as well. We're also going to have enzymes that'll start to be released in the stomach that'll break down proteins. Okay. Very little absorption happens in the stomach except for certain drugs and also alcohol. Aspirin and alcohol are absorbed through the stomach. Isn't that kind of cool? Okay, that's why if you have a glass of wine and an empty stomach or a glass of alcohol, you get, I mean, especially me, I am such a cheap date. I have like half a glass of wine, I'm drunk anymore. You know, it's, you know, because it goes into the stomach and it's absorbed quickly. Okay. Small intestines, guys, is going to be the primary area for absorption of nutrients. Colon is going to be the primary, or large intestines, you know, kind of interchangeable, is going to be the location for absorption of water and the creation of certain vitamins. Okay, B vitamins and vitamin K is going to be a big one in the colon. Okay. Small intestines, especially the ileum, and don't forget, you know, the spelling of that, of course, is E and not I. Ileum is going to be the location for the reabsorption of bile salts. I'm going to get into this whole system, you know, once again, the enterohepatic system. And of course, bile salts, we know, emulsifies fats and makes us able to absorb fats. Liver is like the NyQuil of the body. It does so many things, right? It is going to process nutrients. It stores nutrients. It helps to detoxify. It's going to form certain lipoproteins, which will go out to the body. So liver is super important for multiple things. Pancreas, don't forget, is part of the GI tract as well. GI system, I should say. It's going to produce the enzymes that are going to help to break down macronutrients. Now, you guys understand macro versus micro, right? Okay, macronutrients are going to be your carbs, your lipids, your proteins. Micronutrients are your vitamins and your minerals. And, you know, we include water with those nutrients as well. I always remembered it because macro is larger. So you're going to get carbs, lipids, and proteins from larger intakes of food as opposed to your vitamins. I took my little bitty vitamin this morning. It's tiny. Not that either one's less important, though, right? They're both very important. Would you guys like a lecture on metabolism instead of fluids? Carbs, lipids, proteins, glycogenesis, glycolysis. You guys don't care, do you? You're like, get me out of here. I'm done. Okay, I'll make the decisions.
The decisions are hard because you don't know what you don't know.
I know, it's tough.
So it's like,
Maybe I'll do a little bit of fluids, a little bit of metabolism, a little bit of genetics. How does that sound?
Suicidal.
No, I'll just do like an hour of each. Yeah, I'll be home like twitching. Okay. Okay, you guys make it up. That's what I should do. Okay, so gallbladder is going to emulsify fats. Sorry, guys. I'm a little giddy this morning. I had too much caffeine. And I had cold medicine again. So, yeah. Anyway. Oh, wait a second. Hold on, Nellie. Hold on. Really went far ahead. I'm like, how did we get to telescoping? Okay. Okay, so once again, we're looking at the, you know, the small microscopic structures here. So if you can imagine a tube, right, of the GI tract, we're doing a transverse section, we're looking inside of that tube, okay? So the layers are from inside out. Don't forget, a mucous membrane, guys, is a membrane that's open to the external environment, okay? And I always remember that because if you hock a loogie, you got to use your mucous membrane, right? Okay, I know, silly things, but you guys know what it's like when you're memorizing 1,000 things. Just any silly little thing that's quick and easy. So submucosa would be moving out in that circle. Sub meaning below mucosa. This is going to be the layer below the mucosa. Okay. The next layer out, and you could actually, this is labeled, I know it's hard for people in class to see. This is actually labeled on there if you look at it closer. You'll have to probably pull it up on your computers to see it. People at home could probably see it okay. People in class is probably a little difficult. But tunica muscularis. This is obviously, and tunica means a layer, or tunic, okay, a layer. Tunica muscularis is going to be the layer that has the muscle in it. Now with the GI tract, and I think I have I have notes on these. Okay, we'll get into this. Now the outermost layer is going to be the tunica serosa, and the tunica serosa is going to create that serous membrane because it's synonymous with that serous membrane. So it's the outer layer. And the purpose of that is to help hold it in place, to provide a layer of a serous membrane that'll release that serous fluid so we can decrease friction in these cavities, okay? So tunica serosa is synonymous with that serosal layer, Okay. So tunica mucosa is going to be the innermost layer. This is where we're going to have epithelium. Now, epithelium, guys, are different tissues in the body, but they always have the same presentation of being closely packed cells. Epithelium of the skin, or the skin is epithelium. It's closely packed cells. Anywhere that you have covering and lining is going to be closely packed cells. And the reason that our body puts these closely packed cells on coverings, on linings, on surfaces is for protection, okay? But there are going to be certain areas such as the GI tract where we need protection in part of it, but we also need absorption and secretion in different areas. For example, if you think about your mouth, you need to have protection because you're bringing in substances that are corrosive, friction from chewing, right? Also, the esophagus needs protection as well. So in those areas, we're going to have layers, multiple deep layers of cells that'll protect the mouth and the esophagus, okay? That deep, multiple layers are called stratified squamous. Does that ring a bell at all? From way back when? Okay, stratified squamous. When we get into the GI tract, let me pull you guys out because I think it's kind of important to review this, okay? So when we're talking about epithelium, we're talking about closely packed cells, which are going to cause covering and linings or provide covering and linings in different areas of the body that either will provide protection or areas that we can secrete and absorb. Anywhere that you could think of that we're secreting and absorption at a microscopic level is going to have epithelium, okay? So inside of our mouth, down the esophagus, and also around the anus, and I think part of the rectum, no, just the anus, is going to be what's called a stratified squamous. And that stratified squamous is going to be stacks of cells. And we have stacks of cells because if we abrade or rub off, what am I doing now? Rubbing a whole bunch of skin cells off. Guess what? Underneath them is more skin cells. We provide more, we push them up, we rub them off, okay? And in order to keep this regenerating, we have to keep regenerating more cells and we have to stack them high. Same thing in the mouth, same thing in the esophagus, same thing at the anus. There's friction in those areas. We need to have protection, okay? But because we also have a thick layer of cells, we also cannot let microorganisms through as quickly, right? We keep them on the surface. We actually secrete a little bit of acid onto our skin, and the acid helps to destroy those microorganisms on the surface of our skin before they can get through and get to our blood, okay? Does that make sense? I'm kind of, okay, good. So if it doesn't make sense to people at home, please shoot me an email. But once we get into the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, we can't have multiple cells, right? Because what do we want to start doing? We want to either start secreting substances up to the foodstuffs that we've ingested, or we want to start absorbing our foodstuffs so we can start processing those nutrients. So it changes from these multiple cells into something called a simple columnar. And a simple columnar is going to be one cell layer of columnar shaped cells. So if we were to take a scope with a microscope on it and go down into the stomach, down into the small intestines, down into the large intestines, and look at that surface, if we were to take a section of that, it would be covered with a simple columnar, okay? And a simple columnar, okay? So imagine we're in the small intestines, okay? Oh yeah, I already put some up here, okay? So we're looking, here's the lumen or the opening. I'm gonna take this little section here of the small intestines and move it over here and blow it way, 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 way up. On the surface of that small intestine, I'm going to have a simple columnar. Okay, and then of course it would be attached to connective tissue that would hold it down And underneath it in certain areas, we'll have whole patches of collections of white blood cells. Okay, can you envision that? Are you guys with me with this? Okay. And then there's also blood supply. I mean, there's things that you would think normally would be here, innervation, things like that. Okay. But this one layer provides a better ability to let substances out or bring substances in, doesn't it? Okay. And the way that we can either bring them in or out is either between the cells or through the cells is a more common way. Okay. Cells will decide, okay, we're going to bring this stuff in, transport it into the blood system, or we need to secrete some mucus or, digestive enzymes or whatever it is to that surface. Okay. Are you with me? Okay. So on these simple columnar cells in the GI tract, do you guys remember these little modifications? These little finger-like projections that are on this surface. Oh, great guess. Cilia was the guess. Microvilli. They're thicker. They're very similar to cilia. Cilia we'll find in the respiratory tract. Those are more hair-like. They're thinner. They are also motile. They have a little bit of muscle at the bottom of them, cilia. These are microvilli. Microvilli are going to be fatter. And by doing this wave-like pattern, we're increasing surface area. Okay? Why would we want to increase surface area in the GI tract? What are we doing in the GI tract? We're absorbing. When we bring in foodstuffs, we go back to that hindbrain. We don't know when we're going to eat again. We want to take as much nutrients as we can from the foodstuffs that we ingest, so that way we have the backup plan in case we don't eat again. So we have microvilli, okay, on the surface of those cells. Okay?
Surface, not surface.
Surface. I knew there was going to be. Where is it?
Microvilli will increase.
Yeah, not service area. It's not a rest station, although it kind of is. Surface area, F-A-C-E. Sorry about that. We also create some digestive enzymes. So while we're here and while we have this in our head, there's one in particular I want to talk about. In the small intestines, one very specific digestive enzyme that's released right at this mucosal border is lactase. Lactase, A-S-E. What do you think that's going to break down? Lactose. So people who are lactose intolerant do not have a sufficient amount of lactase being released to this mucosal border. They can't break down milk products. And milk products basically are made up of smaller sugars. So if you're unable to break those sugars down, they will stay in the lumen. That'll increase what's called osmotic pressure. It'll draw more fluid into that lumen. And guess what happens? Those people have diarrhea because it'll facilitate the movement of fluid into that lumen and it'll keep it moving through the GI tract. That's why people who are lactose intolerant have that side effect when they eat, when they ingest dairy products. Okay, so tunica mucosa. Any questions on that layer? Okay, good. Tunica submucosa. So this is a little bit easier. Tunica submucosa is going to be this layer of connective tissue and stuff underneath. Okay, there's connective tissue. There's a loose. There's a dense. You don't need to know this. I'm just rattling it off. There's a blood supply. Okay, but there is a culmination of white blood cells in patches. Peyer's patches ring a bell in the ileum, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm not even going to get that far along with it. What I want you to understand is there's a culmination of white blood cells underneath this mucosal layer that provides a front line of defense for us. It's part of our immune system. It's called the GALT system, gut-associated lymphatic tissue. Okay? Gut-associated lymphatic tissue. Okay, so when we ingest all those foreign substances, it's the GALT system that comes into play. Okay. Tunica muscularis is going to have 2 layers of muscles. So if you could just imagine that my fingers are the muscle cells, and we're talking about this tube, okay? The two groupings of muscle layers are circular, which are going to create muscle cells going in this circular presentation. So you can imagine if they compress in a certain segment, they'll decrease the lumen space. And what they do, guys, is they do the cha-cha with food. They'll push food forward, then they push it back. Then they push it a little bit more forward, then they push it a little bit back. And what we're doing with that is not peristalsis, we're churning. We're churning so we can increase the time and the exposure of foodstuff to that mucosa, and those simple columnar cells can absorb more foodstuff. Okay? The next layer is going to be longitudinal. So if you can imagine my fingers as the muscle cells, once again, the longitudinal layer, and there's a picture of this, if this analogy is not helping you, that go this way. And what these do will help with, I'm like flying here, help with peristalsis. And peristalsis is going to be more of that progression of trying to move foodstuff along. Okay? We have small peristaltic waves, but we also have 3 to 4 large ones a day that help to completely clear the colon. And that's usually, you know, people usually defecate 2-3 times a day, but that's so variable, right? So my cousin's son used to go once a week, which he obviously had a little bit of an issue. But theoretically, okay, we have 3 to 4 large movements a day in the muscle, which may create movements, bowel movements. Okay, there's a third layer in the stomach, and that helps. It's an oblique layer, helps to turn every which way. Okay, and helps to turn stuff up. Tunica serosa is that outer layer that's going to create that serous. I'll keep it full up. Those serous membranes, we talked about that already. Helps to keep those organs in place. Also helps to release serous fluids so we can lubricate that area. Excuse me. So we have, I'm not going to get a ton into the enteric nervous system. This is just about it. But I just want to refresh your memory that it is autonomic and it's under control of parasympathetic. Okay? So if you're in some sympathetic facilitation, if you're nervous, if you're exercising, you know, don't swim after eating. Well, there's reason, because if you stimulate the sympathetic nervous system through embarrassment, exercise, or excitement, you're not going to have the proper blood going to the GI tract to absorb the nutrients. You're not going to have the proper peristalsis moving substances along. So it is under the control of the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay. Submucosal, so there's 2 nerve plexuses, and you remember a plexus, of course, is an intertwining network. There's submucosal, which will be in the submucosa, and my enteric are between the 2 muscle layers. The cool thing about the gut, guys, is people actually, scientists have studied it, and they actually have found that it is self-perpetuating. They call it the brain in the gut. So the gut can basically get signals through its nerves and send an immediate response without going to the spinal cord and without going to the brain. It sends signals to the spinal cord and the brain as well, but there's internal mechanisms that will keep digestion going in and of itself, which is kind of cool for me, but I'm a dork. So anyway, so gut, nervous, enteric system, okay? So what you need to know from that is it's under parasympathetic control. Sympathetic will slow it. Just know that the submucosal nerve plexus is in the submucosa, and my enteric is going to be between those 2 muscle layers. Okay. So chemical digestion, just a real brief, let me bring people at home in. Okay, review. ASE, for the most part, is going to denotate or designate an enzyme. Okay, so we have primarily amylase in the mouth. Okay, that should be pancreas, not pancrease. I don't know what happened there. Okay, amylase is going to break down carbohydrates. So we have amylase. If you were to take like a saltine cracker and chew, that amylase is going to break those simple carbs down into glucose. And guess what it's going to start to taste like after? It's going to start to taste sugary. It's going to start to taste sweet, because this amylase is going to break down those carbohydrates in it into glucose, and you'll start to taste the glucose in it. It's pretty cool. Pancreas also releases amylase. Okay, and I'm going to go over that duct system of the pancreas. The pancreas is going to release amylase, which will be secreted into the duodenum. I'm going to go over this and break down carbohydrates as well. And this is where that lactose intolerance can happen, not from the amylase. Okay, lactase is an enzyme that's secreted to those mucosal membranes that we went through that'll break down lactose. People who are lactose intolerant can't break that milk stuff down. It stays in the lumen. We know the lumen, of course, is the opening, and it brings and it draws fluid from the GI tract into it, and they have diarrhea as a side effect. Proteins are broken down into amino acids. Don't forget that proteins are long chains of amino acids linked together. When we ingest proteins, we have pepsin that's in the stomach, which will break it down, okay? And we also have chymotrypsin and trypsin, which I'm not going to get into. I think pepsin is one of the biggest ones that we'll talk about from the stomach. The thing to keep in mind with that is that pepsin, guys, is stored in the stomach as pepsinogen, okay? Pepsinogen. Because that pepsin left uncontrolled would eat down our proteins. We're protein. Our body is made up of protein. Well, other things as well, but the structures are protein. So if that pepsin was just being released into the stomach all the time, it would start to eat away at the stomach lining. So pepsin is stored as pepsinogen, OGEN, and then it's triggered by hydrochloric acid will actually trigger it. So we release hydrochloric acid, pepsinogen, it'll break down into pepsin and it can break down protein. Okay. Now lipids are emulsified with bile salts. And also broken down by lipases. Okay, so lipids are broken down by lipases from the pancreas. I don't know what happened there. Probably hit add pancrease. That should be pancreas. Okay, and that should be from as well. Now emulsification, guys, when you put water and oil together, they're gonna separate. If you were to put in something as lecithin, okay, and lecithin is the name is escaping me what it is. It's an emulsifier. It's a phospholipid. I think it's a phospholipid. I'm pretty sure it's a phospholipid. So anyway, what an emulsifier does is it'll actually surround those little fat droplets, and it allows it to be dispersed through water. And by emulsifying it, we spread it out so it doesn't separate and just go to one area. Bile salts do the same thing. They have phospholipids in them that will surround those fat droplets and emulsify them throughout the blood. Okay? Blood is mostly water. So emulsify. Nucleic acids we get through our foodstuffs that'll break down. We'll break them into little units that we can use for RNA and DNA. That's about all I'll say about that. Okay? Any questions about those? No? Good. Excellent. So absorption, mostly small intestines, ileum, bile cells, we talked about this. We'll break down and absorb carbs, lipids, proteins, and those nucleic acids. And obviously we'll absorb vitamins and minerals as well, and water. The way we absorb it, though, most of these substances, other than substances called chylomicrons, will be absorbed through the liver, through the portal circulation, okay? Chylomicrons are an exception. They'll go directly into the bloodstream. They are fats, which will go directly into the bloodstream and out to the systemic body, chylomicrons. So there's, once again, these are little packets of fats that get emulsified that'll be able to go directly through the bloodstream. Is this all ringing a bell? Does this all sound pretty familiar, more or less? Good. Okay, so those layers, just keeping those layers in mind as we're moving through this. This, I was like puking reading this description. Did anybody read the description in the book of vomiting? Oh, God, I hate vomiting. So I think a lot of this I didn't go over because the book, goes through the explanation of expulsion, blah, 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 blah. But what I do want to explain to you is that there is a vomiting center in the medulla oblongata, okay? And we know that whole blood-brain barrier is intact that keeps substances out. except for here. This is an exception. There is no blood-brain barrier at this vomiting center. And the reason that we have this opening is so we can have an immediate response to poisonous substances which we've ingested, right? So that is a break in the blood-brain barrier, which I always said that was pretty cool, okay? It's known as the chemoreceptor trigger zone, CTZ, your book called it, okay? Receives input also from the inner ear, which I found this interesting. Let me tell you a little story. Last year, I was desperately ill at school. I had just set up a lab exam for my students. I had just gotten out all the cats, all the brains, all the eyes, had it all set up. It was 3 in the afternoon. I'm like, good, I'm all done. I'm going to go eat my soup, you know, whatever. And you know how you get that feeling? I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm getting sick. And by 6 o'clock, I was like crawling back and forth to the bathroom, right? I'm like, I'm not gonna throw up, because I hate throwing up. It's irrational. Not gonna throw up, not gonna throw up. But you know, the minute I got into my car, and this, I never thought of this before. This chemotactic trigger zone has a direct connection to your inner ear with your balance. So as soon as I got into my car, and I started moving, that linear movement triggered my balance zone. Oh yeah, I'm like pulled over on the side of the road in the school thinking, oh, you know, like I'm like throwing up. I'm like looking around. I'm thinking, oh, the president's like gonna walk out. And I'm like, he's gonna think I'm like drunk at school or something. But that really made sense to me. Do you ever, when you get the stomach flu, you don't wanna move? Now it makes sense to me because you have that direct connection to the inner ear. And it triggers that. I never knew that. I never put that together, but that's pretty cool. Okay. So Mallory-Weiss syndrome are going to be mucosal tears with people who are doing really excessive, aggressive vomiting, you know, or people who are alcoholics who vomit quite a bit as well are going to start vomiting up blood. And that esophagus is not relaxed. It gets tears in it, and they'll start vomiting up blood. Okay. Oh, here, I have a little link here. Let's see if it's not. Why is it not letting me directly? Oh, hold on. Huh, so weird. It used to let me. Okay. I thought this was kind of a cool little thing. This is probably all hat for you guys, but I still like to do it to sort of break things up. I like the music. Do you guys ever think, like, what did we do before surgeries like this? People just got sick and died. And this guy comes in here and fixes it in what? A minute? That's amazing. So cool, isn't it? I'm gonna go into surgery. Who's gonna take me into surgery with them? Okay, so expulsions, so diarrhea. So keep in mind, you know, with diarrhea, a couple things will happen. Transit time will be shorter, so things will stay in the lumen, they'll draw more fluid. Okay, that's part of our body's response if we're sick. It's trying to get rid of the substances that we've ingested or we've gotten in there. And that process of keeping more substances in the lumen of the GI tract is going to be that osmotic pressure. Okay, remember that osmotic pressure is going to be the concentration of the solution. So because we're keeping more substance in the lumen, we're going to draw more fluid into it, which will cause transit time to, not transit time, I'm sorry, cause there to be diarrhea. And of course, if transit time is quicker and our body's trying to get rid of those substances, we'll keep more substances in the lumen as well and draw more fluid into it as well. Okay, obviously can lead to dehydration, acidosis as well. Okay. Patients tend to lose that bicarbonate ion. That should all ring a bell from the buffer systems, right? And if you're dumping bicarb, you're losing that part of that buffer system. You're going to be more acidic, more acidotic, okay? Irritable bowel, also known as spastic colon. Kind of, interesting. I think that, they say there's a lack of fiber. I think there's a stronger link with personality type, with people who tend to be, how shall I say it, a more nervous type, more of a worrier. Is there a link with fibromyalgia as well? That just came to me. God, I want to say there's a link with fibromyalgia possibly. Some patients, I don't know, that just popped in my head. But spastic colon, they're going to have abdominal discomfort, intermittent bouts with diarrhea and constipation, and like bad diarrhea, like have difficulty getting to the bathroom kind of diarrhea. Fatigue. God, I want to say there's a link with fibromyalgia. Remind me to look at it during the break. Okay, and cramping. There's abnormal peristaltic movements, which may indicate, of course, there's some sort of nervous sort of problem with it as well. And if you're a nervous type, you're going to be stimulating that sympathetic nervous system. Okay, that may not afford the parasympathetic enough control to keep things moving properly. Okay. Gastrointestinal inflammation, so the itises. I found sort of, it's not, okay, I'm sorry, I thought we were into inflammatory bowel disorders. So esophagitis. So, reflex, this is the GERD, this is the, if you're from Utica, the agita, right? Are you guys, anybody Italian? Okay, actually, I always know people. So people who are Italian, my husband's family is very Italian, and we'd go for the Christmas dinners, and everybody would have agita after. And of course, what do you do with agita? You do a shot of Sambuca, and you eat some more, right? So a little bit of espresso, whatever. So reflex esophagitis is going to be that agita, that heartburn, the gastroesophageal reflux disease. So if it's once a year at Christmas time when you can't help yourself and you pig out, not a big deal, right? You take a little Pepcid and you move on. But if this is a chronic problem, this is going to be a bad problem. And what happens now that we know a little bit of that wrong. There we go. Right. A little bit of that histology. I want to go over it really quickly with you because this is where Barrett's esophagus comes into play. Okay. So what happens is down along the esophagus. So here's the esophagus. Oh, people at home, I'm sorry. There. Okay. So we've got the esophagus, we've got the diaphragm, and then right here at the cardiac portion of the stomach, we've got, remember that fundus, right? And then we have the body. Is that dark enough? Gosh, I feel like people at home might not be able to see that. Let me see if that's much better. Okay. So here's the esophagus, the diaphragm, the stomach. Okay. There we go. So this is the cardiac region of the stomach. And at this point, that stratified squamous, that thick layer of epithelium that's protected, immediately turns into a simple columnar right here. Okay? So when we get that persistent GERD, that gastroesophageal reflux disease, the acidic contents of the stomach come up into the esophagus. Okay, and there's a couple reasons why. The sphincter can be loose. There's a sphincter right there at the diaphragm. That can be loose, but we can also have a hiatal hernia, which is a little bit further in the notes. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But if we get a little bit of that acidity coming up into the esophagus, that nice protective stratified squamous will turn into a simple columnar. And we get this simple columnar starts to eke up into that bottom part of the esophagus. Well, for some physiological reasons that I don't know, that makes the bottom of the esophagus more prone to cancer. And that's why our people with our Barrett's esophagus, we want to make sure that they're on medications to protect them against that. Okay? So it's that transformation of the stratified squamous to a simple columnar there that makes it more prone to be cancerous. Okay? So, and that starts with the esophagitis. okay, that inflammation, that infection, okay? So it can also be with pregnant women. And I mean, if you've ever seen a picture of a pregnant woman or, you know, a depictive picture of their insides, I mean, your uterus goes right up to your xiphoid and all those organs get pushed aside. Well, it just makes sense. Your stomach is going to get pushed up. If your stomach gets pushed up, it's going to be more prone to push the stomach up towards the esophagus. Okay, same premise as a hiatal hernia. Okay, so we've got sliding hiatal hernia, and then there's also the one that paraesophageal that goes off to the side. Now, what happens is it'll push it up through that esophageal hiatus. That's that opening. The esophageal hiatus is the opening through the diaphragm. And when you look at the diaphragm, if I were to dissect out abdominal contents and you were to look up, if you guys come with me to see the cadavers, and you look up through the diaphragm, it's a pretty solid sheet of muscle. And then you've got serous membranes on both sides of it. And through it, you could see very distinctive holes. There's a hole for the esophagus, there's a hole for the abdominal aorta, and there's a hole for the inferior vena cava. You know, very distinct. And then you have nerves and supporting blood vessels that'll sneak through those openings as well. So you've got that opening for that esophageal hiatus going through there. And then I think I won't jump the gun. Hiatal hernia is going to be, we've got a sliding, which will just pull the stomach up, and paraesophageal, which will actually get a little bubble off to one side. Either way, it's going to open that up a little bit, that esophageal or that cardiac sphincter, and allow those acidic contents to come up a little bit. Okay. So, oh, and I just have a picture there. Okay. So I wasn't sure if I was going to ask you or not. People at home, let me bring you in. Okay. And there you go. That's a great depiction. And you could see, of course, that pink, the darker pink is going to represent those acidic contents moving up. Okay. There's such a strong link with obesity and hiatal hernias. Okay. There's such a strong link. Some people have it. For some reason, that esophageal hiatus has opened up, but there's a very strong link with obesity. Okay. Inflammations of the stomach and intestines. Okay, we're going to go through a couple of different things, and this will be the last thing. I'll give you guys a little break. So according to the locations, that makes sense, right? H. pylori, of course, we know that's that bacteria. The interesting thing about that is it has a little corkscrew shape to it. So when it comes down, it'll sort of corkscrew its way into the gastric lining, and then it damages that area. Those protective mechanisms in that area get broken down. The mucosal layer, there's a mucosal layer, I'll get into it in a little bit. And as acidity is more prone to damage that area of the stomach, causing the ulceration. Okay, so that's what happens with the H. pylori. Okay. So acute erosive gastritis, you know, alcohol, aspirin, NSAIDs, infection too can cause it as well. Okay, so let's take a quick little, I'm starting to feel like I have to go to the bathroom. So let's take a quick little break here, and we'll fire it up in a minute. People at home, if you have any questions, go ahead and shoot them to me. Wow, this is going to take longer than I thought, this lecture. Maybe we'll do the second half of this. I put this in as a representative of people with diverticulitis like me, this song. Keep on moving. Take your fiber. All right.
I had problems with irritable bowel, and it was interesting.
You had problems with irritable bowel?
I did.
Oh.
For a long time. When I started on,
Probiotics?
no, it was actually Lexapro for depression, anxiety.
Ah, you know why? I know why. Serotonin. Yeah, serotonin receptors. Yeah.
And I'm like, because it was near I was diagnosed with cancer, and things were really stressful. So he put me on it. He's like, you know, let's just, well, he never took me off of it because
If you're happy,
it made everything so much more regular, no pain, no
Good for
diarrhea.
you.
He's like, I'm like, is it because of the anxiety reduction? He goes, it's probably the serotonin. So
it's the serotonin receptors, yeah, because, well, hold on just a sec.